This is my music.
Welcome to Up Close and Empowered with host Sonna Johns. Over the next hour, you'll hear from Sonna and her guests on how you can become more empowered through life's most challenging situations. Sonna's journey through her own transformation has inspired her to awaken you to your divine power.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sonna Johns, and welcome to this week's Up Close and Empowered, inspiring you to awaken to your true power and lead a more vibrant, empowered, fulfilling life. Thank you so much for listening. Today, I have a very special guest with me, and we're going to just get right into it. But before I introduce him, I want to share a little bit of the backstory about how we met, because it's really a great story. And I have one other really funny story to share so that it'll set the precedence for this whole time together. So Chris and I met through a mutual friend right when the quarantine started. And I had just left a major chapter of my life. I was in quarantine. I was rethinking things. I had to do like a 180. And when I met him, I don't know how we ended up in your office, Chris. I have no idea, but we did, even though it was quarantine. I don't know if we were wearing masks or what, but we ended up meeting and connecting. We talked for probably, oh my God, it had to be 2 hours on life and our journey and everything else.
Yeah.
It seemed like 5 minutes, but it was really like 2 hours. So from there, we just kind of connected. And then because we were still in this lockdown, he asked me if I was interested in joining a small weekly group that he had to coach on the true self, the ego. And he had a small group of people that wanted to join in. He said it would be a great safe space, that everybody had their own gifts to share, and that it would be a great way to educate ourselves and gain more knowledge during the quarantine. And it was obviously a very vulnerable time in my life. And I thought, yeah, why not? So we started doing these sessions online through Zoom with a very small group of like 3 or 4 people. And it was great. We really connected and I learned so much. And ever since, we've stayed friends and fellow soul coaches. So I have a more funny story to tell you, though, because this is really going to show you Chris's personality and how passionate and sometimes bold he can be, but in a really, well, let's just say he can get away with it. Let's just put it that way. So
I don't even know what story you're going to tell right now.
I know. That's why I saved it for this, because I thought, how am I going to intro the show? And I thought, gosh, I got to tell that story because this is a really good one. So about 1.5 years ago, it was really right when the quarantine was lifting. I had gotten an opportunity to do a keynote talk at major company. And I was just getting back into speaking because before I was just coaching and I was doing smaller groups. And I had this opportunity and I thought, well, now it's time to reinvent myself. I better get myself back out there speaking because I had spoken for years, a long time ago. So I meet with Chris, I'm in his office and I said, Chris, I got to tell you, I'm a little bit nervous about this presentation. And he could tell I was. He was like, what's wrong with you, Sonna? And I said, you know how deep I am. You know how spiritual I am. You know how I am. And you know how I have to be so honest. And, and I said, and he said to me, well, what's the problem? I said, well, I'm having a difficult time with coming up with a way to lighten the presentation where it's not so spiritual or deep or about the ego. And he says to me, he goes, Sonna, who cares? Do you remember you said that? You go, they need this. He goes, you know what? He goes, who gives a you know what? He goes, you need to be authentic. And if that's who you are, you incorporate that way in whatever way you can. And I said, Chris, that's easy for you to say. It's easy for you, a guy, big corporate background, going into this huge crowd of probably 150 people. And so I was I was just trying to get my sea legs back, right, from this major transition in my life. And so he looked at me, and I will never forget this as long as I live. He said to me, Sonna, it's not about what you say. It's not about being perfect. It is about being authentic and the essence of who you are. And I looked at you and I go, I'm listening. And he said, it's all about your essence. It's about your energy. It's about what people are feeling when they're with you. It's not about the words that you say, or even if you fumble. And I have to tell you, it was life-changing. It was life-changing. I've made posts about this. I talked to my clients about this. I talked to my friends about this. And it just really hit home with me. And so that was a new beginning for me. And we have just been, close coach friends
Kindred
for
spirits. We're kindred spirits for
exactly,
sure.
exactly. So this past summer, I had been approached to get on this show, to be on this show for this, to head off this empowerment show. And I told him, I go, Chris, I think this is the route I really want to go. Like, I love broadcasting. I love this work. I did it years ago. And I said, they approached me and they asked me if I would do this. And I said, I really feel like this is right. And you looked at me and you said, Sonna, like, your energy is like off the table right now. This is definitely where you need to
This is
be.
beautiful.
So I said, and it would be really, really special to me if you could be one of my first guests. And
Yeah.
he said yes.
Here I
So
am.
that's why I'm so glad to be here today, because Chris really brings, he's really on an island by himself. And I mean that in a good way, because you have your own style. You've been through the work. You've done the inner work. You've been through it all. And you continue to do it all to become whole and be authentic in your leadership. And you're teaching others to do the same. And I know that you coach people on an individual basis. We'll talk more about that. But you're also talking to larger organizations and where we really need it in this world, like to make a difference on the planet. So I
Absolutely.
just love your whole style. I love your foundation of what you do, which you're going to have a chance to talk about that in a few minutes. But just a little bit of an intro. Chris's extensive background in business for over 30 years has led him to combine heart and soul-based coaching into his consulting and facilitation with organizations, impacting individuals on all levels. For 13 years, Chris owned a full-service marketing and advertising agency. He acted as an advisor and business strategist to hundreds of companies, their owners, and management teams. Today, he's helping individuals, independent businesses and entrepreneurs and corporations unleash their full potential. And he has a secret sauce of doing that, which he's going to share with us today. So Chris has done, like I said, all the work, and he is continuing to do the work and help others on their journey as well. He's a great guy. He's passionate about what he does, which you're all going to hear right now. So let's welcome Chris Sarris to the show. Yay!
Yeah. Thank you
Welcome to
so
the show,
much,
Chris.
Sonna. I said this. I love watching you in your element, and you are in your element right now. And that was a whole book on purpose, was called Your Element. So thank you so much for including me. I'm grateful for our friendship and the connection we've had at that deeper soul level. It's wonderful to have kindred spirits that you can do this journey with, and I consider you one of them. So, and
Thank
thanks for
you.
being on here and being able to kind of share my story, and really in
Yeah.
the end, just being able to hopefully be an inspiration or a breakthrough for somebody else listening, because um, I have a quote I love and I use a lot in my work, and it says, "There is no such thing as an ordinary person. We're all extraordinary, but most of us don't know it." And I believe that to be deeply true. And if I was to get in, and you can let me know when you want me to kind of jump into the
Yeah, no,
backstory.
I want you to tell your backstory, but I also want to tell everybody that Chris is the quote guru. He is a quote guy, and he has the most amazing quotes, and he uses it all the time, and it always fits in perfectly. So feel free to share any of your quotes and wisdom today throughout the show. So I would like to start by getting your backstory. Like, what do you want to share about early childhood onto, owning your own business, whatever you want to share, Chris.
Yeah, for sure. Let me jump in. So, I don't think everyone has a story. I think everyone is a story. We all are stories. And when we're with each other and we're sharing our story, we're on sacred ground. And I feel like my story is pretty normal in a lot of ways. And then it's abnormal. But even the abnormal parts, I think, are part of life. In very general terms, I feel like I grew up in, by the way, Berkeley, Royal Oak, Michigan. And in many ways had a wonderful childhood growing up. Parents who I was very loved by. I've got 3 siblings, but within that, there was also trauma. My parents got divorced, and I went through different hardships, different challenging things. Some really tough stuff happened to me in certain ways, and um, and I didn't think much of them when I was younger, but they definitely formed who I was for the first half of my life, and I'm calling that till around 35. So, let me jump into the backstory a little bit differently. Another quote I use, and by the way, the reason I love quotes is I feel like a good quote can pierce through our conventional thinking in our normal way of looking at stuff. So sometimes they can dispel a lot of wisdom in just a brief sentence, and also really sometimes challenge and change our perspectives in the moment. So that's
Mhm.
why I love them. And for some
Mhm.
reason, not only am I a good joke teller, and I can remember almost any joke I hear, whenever I hear a good quote, I seem to always remember.
And a good
So
storyteller.
thank you. Hopefully I'll do that today. So an expression I use in my coaching all the time with clients is a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I believe a crisis is just God, the universe, however you relate to a higher power, if you do that, trying to get our attention to say it's your turn to grow. Because I really believe at a soul level, the deepest part of who we are and why we're here is here to grow and evolve. And everything in our life is set up for that. So my crisis came about 25 years ago that really changed things for me. I'd been married, I was in my first marriage, and I had a what I would describe, at least from my perspective, as a really good relationship. I was with this person for like 10 years, and we had tried having kids unsuccessfully. And on a midsummer's day, we went to in our local town where we live, went to dinner, and it was over dinner. My ex-partner, her name was Angela, um, told me that she wasn't happy anymore and that she didn't want to be married. And it was I had this moment of like looking at my watch, meaning like you haven't been happy what since this morning, because from my perspective, and in a lot of ways, we had this really great relationship, but clearly there were things that weren't right in it, or we wouldn't be
Mhm.
having this. It was really weird, Sana. I knew in 15 minutes of talking that we were done, and we'd been together for 10 years.
Mhm.
And we ended up getting a divorce, and it was the absolute most painful thing I've ever went through in my life, even more so than the loss of my parents.
Yeah.
And it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
want to offer to a lot of people, whether you realize it or not, it's often the hardest things that we go through that if we can approach them in a certain way, and I'll offer some of that out today, we can actually turn those into the best things that have happened to us. And that was kind of my backstory. So
Mhm.
had this traumatic event. At the time, as my bio had said, I owned a marketing advertising agency with my brother. We had it probably 10 years at that point. I was in my mid 30s, successful, lots of friends, my own business, doing well. And then I had this event happen, and I ended up diving into therapy. And how I would describe it is I love therapy, and therapy loved me. I just really got into it. I'm a big reader. You can see a few books behind me,
Mhm.
but I just dove into this work. And I remember a therapist saying to me, you're really good at therapy. Like, how did you learn to do this? And I'm like, I don't know. I just read and I kind of unpack myself. And so I did this for about 5 years. I would call it my version of Eat, Pray, Love. Went off on these different retreats, and had what I now understood to be a spiritual awakening, a profound shift. And I'll tell you about that in a little bit. But then it was in that journey that I decided I was going to go back to school and become a therapist. I wanted to go study to be a therapist. And a friend of mine who was a therapist told me, who we mutually know, Lori Lipton,
Mhm. Mhm.
she said, Chris, just because you love therapy doesn't mean you're going to like being a therapist. You should be a life coach. This is 23 years ago. I'm like, what's a life coach? I'd never heard of a life coach before. Now, lots of people are life coaches. So I studied it, found a coaching school. When I went there, I knew this is what I want to do the rest of my life. It was the first thing I ever did in my life that I was exceptional at, and I didn't know I was. And even once I realized I had a gift around it, I couldn't tell you why I was good at it. But that's the nature of all of our gifts. And I believe we
Mhm.
all have God-given gifts, talents, and
Yes.
abilities at this soul level. And when we access them and express them, it makes our life magical and those around us.
Mhm. Yep.
So that was that. I knew I'm going to be really quick. I knew when I was going to coaching school that I was never going to coach the way they told me. I know that sounds arrogant, but I wanted my coaching practice to incorporate a lot of the aspects of therapy that I'd done: inner child work, processing trauma, working with belief systems. And I'd also wanted to incorporate a spiritual part of it. And I can get into that a little bit. When I say spiritual, I don't even mean religious. Um, because of this experience I had when I had went on a retreat, I actually had an awakening. Do you want me to get into that now? Or do you want, I have a little more backstory to keep telling. Can I
Yeah,
keep
you
going?
can
Are we
still,
good on that
yeah,
time part?
sure. You can tell, well, you can circle back to that if you want. And also, I'm curious, did you go to coaching school when you were still at the family business at your company, or was
Yes.
that after?
Yes. Yeah, I went to coaching school in 2002. So I had the ad agency, and I was doing therapy, and I was single now. And I was, instead of going to study to become a therapist, I went to coaching school. And I
Mm.
continued to coach for 3 years before I sold my interest in my brother's company. There was a merger that came along, and
And
it was
how
a great
was
time to
that?
step
How
out.
was that leaving a family, like your business with your family, a successful advertising agency? I mean, that's a big move, Chris. That's a big move.
I will tell you how it happened. My brother and I, who he were Irish twins, he's 13 months younger than me. We had a very competitive love challenge relationship. We were a little bit like unhappily married couple in marriage, but our business was so successful we didn't want to leave. And I love my brother Dave, but like in business, we had two alpha identities that caused problems. So we had this opportunity. A company came to us to merge, and we were going to like double the size of the agency, move into these great new offices. And 3 days before I was to sign the partnership agreement, I was doing my kind of daily meditation reflection. I was reading from a book, and it said this: if you are here with us unfaithfully, you are causing great damage. Your dreams will devolve into a nightmare, and you'll extract mostly a price from yourself if you're here with us unfaithfully. I put this book down and I said, oh no, I'm about to get married in 3 days in the form of this new business,
Hmm.
and I'm
Hmm.
not in love. And I had a
Right.
pit in my stomach, and I knew this is what it feels like when people know they're not supposed to get married and they do it anyways.
Yes. Oh, that's a good
So I
point.
went back to my brother about 3 days later and told him, I don't want to do this anymore. This is the path I want. We figured out a buyout. I stuck with the company for about a year before I went and launched and did my own thing. So it was really interesting. I'll give you a couple little quotes on this. Roy Rogers said this: any man who won't bet on himself is a damn coward. And so I was betting on myself. And I knew that, and I'd done enough of this work that somebody had once said, the universe rewards you for taking risks on its behalf. And I
Mm,
knew if I followed this purpose and this challenge, this soul that I had in here, everything was going to work out. There's a lot more backstory of all
I
the
love
struggle.
this. I love this. This is such a great story. I love this. Go on. I'm
Had I
sorry.
not told you this part of the
Well, I
story?
know some of it, but you haven't really
Yeah,
said it in this
yeah.
way. So it's very nice to hear it for the first time in this way.
And I want to just say this too about purpose. And it's interesting because I have people say to me, I want to find my purpose like you did. And I'm like, what do you think my purpose is? And they're like, being a life coach, teaching, doing all this work. And I said, that's not my purpose. That's an expression of my purpose.
Mm.
A lot of people think purpose is found outside of them, and it's not. The only place you can find your purpose is within. So
Mhm.
Picasso says the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose in life is to give it away. And the gift is you in presence, you connected to your true self. And when you live and express from that place, and I can attest to this because I feel like I live in that realm 90+% of the time in my life, it's magical. And it's the love actually, and I can get into that in a minute, but it's about being connected to the energy of love, which is their essence,
Mhm.
and really just being connected with others from that place.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I could say a lot, but I'm going to kind of pause there and let you ask more questions or redirect us.
I
So the
love that.
backstory was that, really quick, I created a coaching model. People would come to me and go, wow, this is really different than what I thought coaching was going to be. This is more like therapy, coaching, and like seeing a psychic, because I'm very tapped in on a psychic level when I'm working with people. And so I ended up trying to name it something different than life coaching. And I came up with this name of soul coaching. And I built out this whole coaching model that really kind of explained my whole premise of like how we get disconnected from our true self and how we
Mhm.
get connected to it. So I
Yeah.
can go into that in a minute, the explanation of it. But that was kind of how it all got started. And you know, the company has just continued to grow, and I do a lot of work with companies and entrepreneur organizations. My vision statement for the company is this: to unleash the power of the human spirit within individuals, leaders, and organizations. one of the things I love most about working in organizations and with owners is they can affect a lot more people. So I love being able to
Right.
coach for organizations when they buy into this and believe this. And I'm really fortunate to have
Mhm.
found a lot of companies who like believe in this, and then they can bring this to their employees, to their team members.
Yes.
And it's uh
We need
it's a
it. We really
it's a
need that.
beautiful way to serve others, and especially when you're an owner and have a business.
Sure. I mean, it builds strong teams and it's a great way to lead your people. And as you know, energy is contagious. So you put that energy out there that you're valued and appreciated. That's going to flourish in all ways. Right.
Yeah.
So I know that that's the premise of what you do with your organizations and stuff. And I know that you have a foundational system, and it's that the true self that you talk about, that we actually did that coaching on a while back, which is really a
Yes.
great depiction of how you even explain it, because it's very simple for anyone to really understand. But one of the things, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, you tell me, Chris, I really want to make sure that we talk about the ego and
Yeah.
when did you decide that maybe you may have been working in that energy of the ego for a while, and what caused you to pivot or shift to go deeper?
So yeah, I would love to do that. Why don't I take 3 minutes or less to describe the coaching model? Are you good with
Okay.
that? And
Yeah,
then
that's
I
fine.
want to get into it.
Yep.
So for the listeners, anyone, yeah, I know some of this will be on YouTube at one point, but imagine an onion. If you cut it in half, it's got layers, right? And so this coaching model has 6 concentric circles. And at the very center is what I call your true self. It's your essence. I say to people all the time, there's more to you than this physical body. There's an energy that animates this body, that is your soul, your spirit. There's all kinds of words for it. And that is our true essence, right? And so this is who we are. And we incarnate, we take this body, and there's this soul. And then in order to thrive and survive, you need food, water, shelter, and love. Well, we all got that because we're here, but we also got a ton of other stuff that's not. I say to people all the time, if you're a human being, you're a trauma survivor. Not trying to sound overly dramatic, but life kicks everyone's butt.
Mhm.
And I don't care how good or not good of a life you've had, you can't avoid being traumatized. So go back to the model, and in the very center is representative heart. It's the true self of who you are. Then the next circle outside of that is what I call negative influences.
You
And
can
these
hold
are
it up. You
anything.
can hold it up because we are going to
Oh
put
yeah,
this on
that's
YouTube.
perfect.
Yeah, that
That's
way if
that's
people go
the
on YouTube, they can see it.
So that's perfect. So here, right here at the center, you have the true self. Then you have these negative influences. And life has, besides all the love and goodness we have, there's a lot of fear and negativity, and any of that can impact and imprint us. And so within that negative influences, you experience fear, judgment, and rejection. Then what that does is it causes wounds and fears. We all have wounds and fears. And within the wounds and fears, you start to experience blame, confusion, shame, and a sense of being lost. Then the next layer above that, as a result of those two experiences, you're going to start to develop false beliefs. And I believe all of us have the same 5 core false beliefs. Whether you agree with this, aware of this or not, you have it. And they are this: I'm not safe. I'm not lovable. I'm not acceptable. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. All of us have some of that. And the reason I call them false beliefs is because they're absolutely not true. But if you believe them, they become true for you.
Mhm.
So you have this belief system that you have to work with. And then what happens is, to be a healthy human being, you have to have an ego. I have an aunt who had Down syndrome. She can't navigate the world the way you and I do because she doesn't have this. There's a healthy part of your ego, and then there's an unhealthy part of your ego. Most of the struggle you have in life comes from the unhealthy part of your ego. But what happens is, from a primal perspective, whenever we experience trauma, confusion, surprise, the ego wants to step in and do two things simultaneously. It wants to figure out how to stop whatever the pain is, and then it wants to figure out a way to protect you so that pain never happens again. So this becomes ego coping mechanisms, which show up as walls, anger, resentment, judgment, greed, power, control, addiction. The list goes on. By the way,
Masks.
yeah, Matt.
Masks.
Well, and that's going to be the next one. So
Okay.
you have this, and then the last one, is it creates a set of masks, and the masks end up evolving into our identity and our personality. And Joe Dispenza has a line I love. He says, your personality creates your personal reality. But what
Mhm.
we do in these trauma events is we start to figure out ways we need to show up to please mom, to please dad, to be with the siblings. And these masks show up as I'll be good, smart, funny, likable, successful, better than, a loner, a rebel, needy, needless. I mean, the list goes on. And it's how we learn to cope within our family system and then the greater world. And so what happens, if you're still looking at this graphic, is this is where we start out in the middle, but in most of the structures in place by the time we're 8 to 10 years old. So a lot of times people end up, they don't even know they're all of these things. Another quote, now I'm going to put this down. I say to people all the time, Sonna, the reason you struggle is because you don't know who you are. You only know who you've become. And who you've become is not who you are. And the essence is, at the true self level, this is who we are. But all of this happened and we didn't know it, and we think we're that. And so my
Yeah.
awakening happened this. I went out to a 10-day retreat out in California called the Hoffman Institute. And what I was able to discover is I finally found who I was. I found my divinity, my perfection. I realized I'm not what other people think of me. I'm not what my ex-wife thinks of me. I'm not my past. I'm not my mistakes. I'm not even my struggles. These are all experiences I'm having, but they're not who I am.
Right.
And that was the awakening, and a lot has emerged out of it. I can speak to you with clarity and understanding today that I didn't have in the moment, but this was all being revealed in the experience.
Right.
I'm going to take a
So
break
yeah,
and
we're going
give
to
you
take a break in just a few seconds here. Chris, real quick, tell everybody where they can get a hold of you, because sometimes we get into the show and I want to make sure it's
yes.
in the segment. So how can they get in touch with you?
So I have a website. It's called soulucoaching.com. SOULYOU coaching, COACHING.com. Soulucoaching.com. I have a free ebook on all of this. It's like a
Right.
25 little page ebook I built. You can download it for free, and it goes into this a lot deeper.
Great. No, that's good. The ebook would be a really good thing to download if you're interested. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back right after that.
Welcome back to Up Close and Empowered with Sonna Johns. Have a question for Sonna or her guests? Join us on the show at 888-346-9141. That's 888-346-9141. Now back to the show.
Hi, welcome back from the break. I am Sonna Johns with Up Close and Empowered, and we're talking with Chris Sarris, and we are going to talk a little bit more about the ego. Tell us a little bit more about that, Chris, and some of the patterns that we might be able to raise some awareness about, and the good and the bad, and what we need to know about that.
So one of the core things that I work with people around is all of us end up having an identity issue. If you don't know who you are, then you're going to have an identity issue, because anybody can kind of decide, or you can decide who you are without that actually being the truth. So when you hear me talk about the true self and soul, you also heard me reference about the ego, and that the ego isn't the bad guy. To be a healthy human being, you need an ego. There's a positive and a negative part. An ego is just an aspect of the mind. And what happens, and the reason ego work is really essential, is when people are struggling, what you're struggling with is your egoic identity, and it's fear-based programming and thinking. And so whenever we become triggered, or however we look out into the world and however our mind's been programmed, that's how we see reality. We make up our reality with our thoughts. A true statement, I believe, is says everything in the universe is neutral until you assign it a meaning. Our ego is, they talk about people having 50 to 60,000 thoughts a day. That's all coming from our mind, our thinking mind. And if that's what we're identified with and creating our reality from, it's going to be very different than when we're down here, anchored in our truth, anchored in love, anchored in, I'm going to almost say, neutrality, without all of the narrative and the judgments and the assessments and the labels that we put on ourselves and others. So I want to say this: you need your ego, but you need to be in charge of your ego instead of your ego being in charge of you. And that's the challenge, is our ego in its narrative, in its convictions, in its absolutes, in its judgments and assessments, we believe are true. Now, here's another great Mark Twain quote. He says, it's
I
not what you
told you
don't,
guys we're going to get lots of quotes.
Mark Twain said, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't true.
Mhm.
And there are tons of things, Sonna, that you know for sure about you in life that aren't true. They're just true because you believe them. But we believe they're like absolutes. And especially when we start to get into any kind of fear-based thinking and energy, and that's a whole thing we haven't even got into, is the two creative energies of love and truth, or fear and negativity. And whenever we sink into any of that kind of egoic fear-based thinking, that then starts to create a narrative and project its reality out onto a person, a situation, or life, there's opportunity for that to be different. And especially if it's painful and it's not working for you anymore, that's where you have to start, is being able to really understand the aspect of the ego and how it becomes the block and inhibitor of the true self. My mom used to say this when I was younger. She used to say ego, EGO, stood for easing God out.
Mm.
So I always point to people when I'm working with them, I'll point to their head as their ego and I'll point to their heart as their soul. And like, when you're living up here, you can't be down here. And so that's the journey. And the Native
Right,
Americans often said the longest journey any of us will ever take is from our head to our heart. And so a lot
right.
of the work is about learning to love yourself, to honor and build yourself up, to kind of show up in ways for yourself that life didn't when we were younger. And a key element in doing that is we have to be able to start to become aware of the ego and create a new relationship with it instead of a combative relationship with it.
Don't you
I
think
can say a
that
lot more, but I'll defer to you to ask.
don't you think that there is an integration though with the heart and the logic of the mind?
Yes.
I mean, that's what I think is the beautiful thing of all, is that we can actually integrate both and be
Yes.
very powerful, right? And very intentional.
Well, you used a great word there, intentional. So yeah, I'm going to say it over and over because, a lot of people talk about the ego now, right? And a lot of people want to get rid of their ego. And I'm like, crazy. You can't get rid of your ego. You don't want to get rid of your ego. It's a beautiful part of who you are as a human being. You just need to be in charge of your ego.
Mhm,
And so when
mhm.
you talk about integration, it's about going down into the heart. So a lot of my work, and I just had a new person come into my office today, and they've done years of therapy and all that. And I said, therapy's great. It really is. I said, but here's the thing. It's what's really different is I'll just make up his name, John. And I said, John, if we work together, you can just chop your head off because we're not going to use your head a lot. We're all going down here because we're going to go down below the neck. I say a lot of traditional
I
type of
love it.
therapy is above the neck, and it's down below the neck where the
Yes.
trauma is, where the unexpressed, unprocessed emotions and energy are. And it's also where our gifts are.
Yes.
Buried underneath all of that is our giftedness. And it was through that inner child work, doing therapy and processing the trauma, that I was able to find more gifts that I
Mhm,
have.
mhm,
And I believe every single one of us, will say this over and all of, we all have God-given gifts and talents and unique abilities within us that if
mhm.
we connect to them and we can trust ourselves and trust God and the universe to pursue that, it will dramatically change our life and not only make our world better, but it makes all around us better. Because this on it. You and I have this. There's a vibe when you're connected to your purpose.
Mhm,
Simon Sinek, who many of you know, he has a great, talking about businesses and
mhm.
organizations. He
Love
says,
him.
imagine,
Just love
yeah,
him.
he says, imagine waking up every morning inspired and going to bed every night fulfilled. I've lived that way for 22 years. I literally don't feel like I work. If I won the lottery and became independent today, I would literally get up and do the exact same thing I'm doing
Right,
because
right.
it's of purpose and it's from me. And I want to keep saying this over and over. Everybody has it. Not some people,
Mhm.
everybody has it, but you have to be willing to do the work.
Right.
So
And so let's
what's
talk a little bit about that. I want
yeah,
to talk
so
a little bit
what's
about that.
what's the work?
So yeah, where does somebody begin? And maybe you can share a couple practices that helped you and that you continue to do so that people can get an idea. Well, you're telling us all about this, but how does somebody get into it? Like, what do they have to do?
Yeah. So we have to find a safe place to be able to, and that typically is going to show up with a therapist. I say to everybody all the time when I have new clients come in here, I say, listen, you're going to do all the work. I can't do any of this work for you,
Hmm.
but you cannot do this work alone because we all believe our own BS. And I had a healer one day when he was working with me. He said, Chris, your problem is you lie to yourself and you believe your lies. And we all do lie to ourselves. We all do BS ourselves. We have a narrative about who we are. And unless you're with somebody who can see a different part of you and speak to that part of you, you really have to feel safe to do this work.
Hmm.
And so you can do it sometimes with friends who've done the work. Like I sit in a couple different men's groups, and it's a great place to be able to get together and open up. But the first step is realizing like that you need or want something different than what you've been creating for yourself in your life. That
Hmm.
almost always comes through in some type of crisis, right? But in the crisis moment, we get to decide: am I going to now start to turn inward and work on myself, or am I going to continue to double down on my old patterns and habits and
Hmm.
continue to make this an external thing? So
Right.
I'm going to just get a different boyfriend or girlfriend. I'm just going to go
Make
get a
more
different job,
money,
just
more
move. I'm going to get more
success.
money.
Yeah.
And at some point you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and you realize, and why they call it a midlife crisis is, and by the way, wonderfully, I'm seeing more quarter life crisis than ever. I'm watching young 20-year-olds starting to get this stuff.
Yeah.
And what a time to change your life versus halfway, is because it takes most of us about midlife to have kind of acquired all this stuff that we thought was going to make us happy and go,
I
why am
know.
I not happy? And it's because you can't find happy outside yourself.
That's right.
I was describing in this men's group, son, I want to say this for a minute, I'll go to it. And we were all kind of describing different frustrations we had in our marriage. And this one person made this statement: well, look, all of us are unhappily married. And I looked at him, I said, I'm not unhappily married. And I said, and he said, you just said, I just talked about some challenges I had. I said, I don't look for into my marriage for happiness. I find my own happiness. My marriage is not what makes me happy. Nothing outside of me is what makes me happy. So this is what we all have to figure out. Practices. I'm going to give you some practical. One of the first things I teach anybody, whether I'm working with them in business, in here in my office, is I ask them, you have to start creating a daily practice. And the daily
Hmm.
practice, one of them is about meditating. We've all heard meditating. Here's why you need to meditate. It's a way to start to quiet the mind and take control back from the ego. A lot of people say to me, I can't meditate. I can't stop thinking. I'm like, by the way, meditating is not to stop thinking. It's impossible to stop thinking. What it is to a practice to detach from your thoughts. Just because they're crossing through your brain doesn't mean you have to attach to them.
Right.
And just because you're hearing a bunch of narrative and information about your external reality, you don't have to agree with it. I mean,
Hmm.
because the truth is, especially the negative part of our ego, it just talks crap to us and everyone else all day. And the sooner you can start to quiet that mind, that's where you're going to start to find more peace. So a daily practice could look like this: going and looking at, if you like YouTube channels, go find some good YouTube channels on self-love, on learning to meditate, on how to be able to grow and evolve yourself, to realize that you have this beautiful aspect of who you are that you don't have full access yet, and that there are different practice and ways of getting there. I mean, the self-help industry, you go into any library, you're going to find thousands of books.
Hmm.
By the way, books, you asked me about them. There's many that I love. I probably have a top 300, not a top 10, but one that just
That's
came to
another
mind that I love.
show for 300
One that just
bucks.
came to mind right now is Don Miguel's Four Agreements.
Hmm.
That kind of changed my life. It's really quick. He says, if you can practice these four things, you can experience heaven on earth. You don't have to die. The
Hmm.
first one is about being impeccable with your word, and what he really is talking about is how you talk about yourself and how you talk about other. And if you're not speaking from love and truth and fear and negativity, you've got to stop talking negatively. The second agreement is, don't take anything personally, because nothing anyone does or says to you is personal. It's about them, not you. Unless it bothers you, then that's about you, and you got
Hmm.
to go look at that. The third agreement is, don't make assumptions. And our little minds are assumption making machines. They create
Hmm.
narrative and meaning about everything, and most of it's fear
That's a
based.
tough one.
You have to really start to, but that meditation helps it.
Yeah.
And the last agreement in that is do your best and know you've always done your best.
Right.
And guess what? Everyone else is doing their best, even in their worst moments. So can we have more compassion for ourselves, more compassion for others? So I like to read in my daily practice. I meditate. I love guided meditations. You can find wonderful guided meditations on all of these subjects I'm talking about on YouTube. And so that I kind of do that at least 15 to 20 minutes every day. And I'm not exaggerating or trying to flex, as my kid would say, but sometimes I'll do it for 3 or 4 hours on a Saturday, but because it's just what I enjoy.
If there's no
But
football going on, if there's no
yes,
football
exactly.
games.
Yes,
Or there's no
exactly.
golf game. I'm kidding,
Golf,
but I know
football,
how passionate you are about your golf and your kids' sports, which is great.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised that you just said that you would maybe spend 3 or 4 hours doing that. I'm like, really? When,
Well,
Chris?
Sonna, I get up most days about 4:30 or 5 every day. And part of it's because I have 3 boys and that's when it's quiet. So you'd be surprised by 8 o'clock in the morning when everyone's waking up, I've had 4 hours going. So anyways, it's fun. So it's that, but here's what I'm going to say, and this is an easy statement, but not easy to do. If you can start to try to learn to love yourself more, talk better towards yourself, have more compassion and understanding towards yourself, that's in the end where you need to get. Somebody asked me recently, Chris, how did you get to where you're at? And I said, through intention and desire. I saw the possibilities of this when I was in therapy, when I started reading all these books. There's a quote from Jesus that I love. He says, "Can you be in the world and not of the world?" And that's a really powerful quote because
Love that.
all of this matters, but most of it doesn't matter. And to our ego, it all matters. Status matters, how much money matters, all of your problems matter, people's political perspectives matter, and it looks all super important. And I'm here not to burst anyone's bubble, but most of it's not important. Most of it just doesn't matter. So you have to really get conscious, decide what matters to you and not.
Right.
And learning to love yourself and putting time and effort there, that's where it all comes to. And then what also came out of that, where a lot of mastery is, and there's a lot of freedom, is just being able to learn to be in the present moment. I have an incredible amount of control over my mind. My ego doesn't really run my life much anymore. It doesn't assign narratives. Even when somebody does something to piss me off,
But you
I
worked
really
at
don't
it.
I
You
don't get
worked at it.
I can have my human experience for the moment, but I don't go into judgment or attack on them because it's never gonna help anything. And so it really changes
But were
your
you
life.
always that way, Chris? I mean, didn't it take some
Not
time
at
to
all,
peel back
not
the
at all.
layers?
I was a good-looking hot mess. And when I say good-looking, I'm not even talking about physical presence. I looked good. I had my own business. I had lots of friends. I did really well. It all looked good. But inside it was a mess. And I
Mhm.
never even knew that because this therapist said to me, and I said, I remember when I was early in the therapy, I don't even know why I'm here. And she's like, well, I'm like, 95% of my life is great and all this. And this was the narrative I've been telling myself. So I didn't have to deal with it. So I had to finally start getting honest. And so I was super insecure. So you heard me make a statement earlier. All of us have addiction. Addiction's just an aspect of the ego. Now, I've never had any substance addiction other than sugar, which is true, and I still need to get over that. But the addiction I had most of my life is I was addicted to approval and validation from other
Mhm.
people. I
Yeah.
needed people to like me because I didn't like myself.
Mhm.
And in fact, not only did I not like myself, I hated myself. And I didn't even realize that until I started looking within. And so I never felt good enough. I was probably average at everything I ever did in my life. And it was interesting because probably a lot of friends in my life wouldn't have felt that way towards me, but that's how I felt about myself. And in the end, it really doesn't matter what other people think. It's about how you feel about yourself. I'll give you a quick scenario. Back then, I always say to people, you could have put me in Ford Field and had 50,000 people who liked me. And if there was one person in that crowd that didn't like me, I would find them. And that was my reality. Now you could stick me in Ford Field with 50,000 people who don't like me, and it kind of wouldn't matter to me because I like me. And I'm not
Right.
changing really for anyone. Now, I would be curious if 50,000 people had those opinions. I might want to look at that. but I don't look for approval or validation outside of
Right.
myself. I like me, I do me. And that was why I said that to you. Sonna, who cares?
Yeah. No, I
Go do
know.
sauna. And
It's
I
so
get it.
true.
I get wanting to make sure everybody in the room likes me. Everyone's saying this is a great experience. And what I'm going to say, and I know this to be true, you know what people want? They want what's real.
They
They
want the
want what's authentic.
authenticity.
They don't care how polished
Absolutely.
you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, you're really polished too. But
Oh, yeah. Thank you,
but
Chrissy.
it's the feel, it's the realness. And can you be real?
Right, right.
I
And
have
speaking of realness, because I want to interject on what you were just saying. So I thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that story, because I really feel like it's impacting people. Like right now, I can feel that. And to just be able to admit that and then be able to overcome that. And I know that you're working on it, but now it's become a default. Wouldn't you say? Like when we work on
oh yeah,
self-mastery
yeah.
over time, there's only a few times where we'll go off the road, but because I mean, we know how to get right back on.
And when I go off the road, it's off the road for 5 minutes.
Yes.
I mean, that's
Yes.
it. It's just
Yeah.
so this is never about not getting off the track. You can't
Right.
not get off the track. It's just how long you're going to stay off of it and how soon can you get back on it. So when you
Right.
talk about realness and authenticity, I want to tell you a cool, I don't know if I've ever told you this story or not. I had this wonderful teacher, Jamie Weiler. If you're listening or anyone know her, she was a beautiful teacher and supporter of me for about 3 years. She wrote a beautiful book called Light Through the Heart. I had found this book. I loved it. I found out she is a local author. We met up. We met up at a Starbucks, and probably for the first half hour of me talking, I was talking all about myself because she was asking me, like, how did you get? I'd been coaching 2 or 3 years at that point. And about halfway through it, she looks at me and says, Chris, you read this, you teach this, you coach this, you speak this, you're not this. I had a split screen experience. My ego wanted to slap her in the face,
Mm.
and my soul sighed in relief because she was speaking to the truth. And what she was speaking to at that moment was I knew all of this up in my head, but I hadn't become it. And
Right.
knowing it and being it are two
Yeah.
different things. It
It's a
starts with
process.
knowledge, but there's a work to be done before you embody it. And it's funny because
Right.
she ended up becoming my coach for about 3 years. And so it's not enough to know this. It's, have you embodied it? Have you become it?
Exactly. I'm so
And
glad
when
you
you
brought that up.
are there, you become a presence. So it's not your words. And that's why I
Right.
said to you, Sonna, and I love how we're circling back to the top. When I said to you, Sonna, your words don't matter. It's your energy. It's your essence,
Right. Right.
your love that comes off of them. And that's what people feel. And that's why they'll be drawn to you, whether you are perfectly eloquent or not.
Right.
And so,
Well, it's all a
uh,
process. And you talk about it's about integrating what we're learning and then embodying it, because people can read all the books, as you know, Chris. We can read all the books, we can go to all the therapy, all the healers, we can do all of this. And if you're not integrating the work, what
yes.
you're learning and being aware of it, conscious of it on a daily basis, then you're not really doing the work. I mean, you're not really, it's because it is a
Well,
process.
it's only going to take you so far. And
Right.
by the way, it'll benefit you. I even remember Jamie going, Chris, listen, with what you do right now, you can help people. She goes, you just can't help me because I'm at a deeper state. So it's not, again, it's not even about making wrong. It's just making an observation.
Right.
And so, um, yeah,
Yeah.
my
No,
mind
no.
just drifted off.
And I think that I'm really glad that we're getting to the end of the show, but we have a few more minutes, but I'm glad that we're wrapping it up with that, because listen, any step that we make is making a step, right? It's just, and there's always more work to do, but it gets to a point where you start feeling the benefits and feeling really good that you want to do more. And you and I talked before we started the show, like once you get on this path, it's really hard to go back or even stop. Like
I
you
would
just
say
want
it's
to keep
almost
on going.
impossible because all the
Yeah,
old stuff that worked doesn't work anymore. And so now you're
right.
only left with
Exactly. Exactly.
Krishnamurti once said to somebody who had just started this, he says, if you haven't begun this journey, it's best you don't. And if you have, it's best you finish.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
obviously they had already started because like once you can't unring the bell.
Right.
You're
Right.
just left to have to do the work. And
Okay, so we're
I will
getting
tell you
really
this, it's hard work, but it's worth it. And it's not as hard and scary as your ego would make you think it. And
right.
by you not choosing you, you're letting an aspect of something that isn't the authentic truth of you, this
Right.
ego, this personality, this way of relating to the world, you're letting
It's
something
controlling
limit
you.
you. And you have like just a treasure of truth in you.
Right.
And it's incredible where that truth will take you. And all you have to
Yes.
do is be willing to be open and say, please help me. And start to reach out somewhere, and the universe will meet you. One last quote. Sonia, I forgot who said it, but she said, whenever man or woman takes a step towards God, God takes more steps towards that man or woman than there are sands in time.
Mm-hmm.
And God in the universe will show up for you if you want to show up for yourself.
Yes. And with everything that we're talking about, it impacts our lives in all ways. So starting within, but it affects our abundance, our prosperity, our relationships, our well-being, our energy. It affects everything. Then it ultimately impacts the world because there's a ripple effect. So
Yeah.
people don't realize the magnitude of doing this kind of work.
Yeah.
Don't you agree?
I agree. And you used the word abundance, and I love the word abundance because abundance is a lot of things. It's friendship, it can be money, it can be success or whatever. Here's the thing that everyone needs to remember: you are worthy,
Mm-hmm.
you are beautiful, you are unique. And if you are willing to be open to that concept and looking, you can find this within. And what's really cool, and it's a whole program I do, and we'll have to do this another time. By the
We
way,
might, because I need
can't
to get your
can't
contact
thank you
information
enough
before the end.
for how much for including me. I'm having a blast.
Oh my God, it's been
But
so
when we
great.
get aligned within ourselves and
Mm-hmm.
then aligned with God and the higher true self of who we are, this is when life flows to you instead of always trying to swim upstream. And these are
Yeah,
the rewards and outcomes of doing this kind of
100%.
work. So
Okay, well, I would love to ask you more questions, but we only have 1 more minute. So I just want to say, if anybody has any questions or comments and you want to reach out to me, you can reach me at info@sonnalife.com. It's Sonnalife. I also have a website at sonnalife.com. And Chris, how can they get in touch with you? Say your website again or your.
so the website is soulyocoaching.com, SOULYOUCOACHING.com. They can reach me there. There's an info, and you can even do Chris at soulyocoaching.com. Either one of them will get to me.
Great.
There's a free ebook on there. So go there. It's 20 pages that goes into a deeper concept and actually gives you some really nice practices.
Okay.
And
All
believe
right.
in
Well,
yourself.
thank you so much, Chris, and thank you everybody for listening. Join me next week. I have Abigail Suoza. I think I'm saying her name right. I'm not positive, but she is really amazing. This is a little bit more for the divine women, but if any of you men want to watch, you might learn a couple things because we're going to dive a little bit deep into self-love, embodiment, the healing process, and even tapping into our sensuality and our intuition. So this is going to be a completely different type of thing next week. But I like to switch it up. I like to give a variety of anything that helps with our empowerment and our inner self. So thank you all for
I will be
listening.
listening.
Yes,
Thanks
thank you,
again, Sonna.
Chris.
Really
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week.